Hello and welcome to the Quest Log. I'm Daniel Hogberg, and today we're going to be discussing Dunjonquest, Temple of Apshai. Released in 1979 for the Radioshack TRS-80 and Commodore PET personal computers, this is one of, if not the earliest computer role-playing games to ever be published commercially. Back in 1974, TSR Incorporated published a little game called Dungeons & Dragons. You might have heard of it. This game, created by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, was the very first pen and paper role-playing game, and its rapid rise in popularity would go on to change gaming forever. Just a few years later, two men by the names of Jim Connolly and John Freeman formed a game company they called Automated Simulations. They would later rename the company Epix. They knew each other from a D&D game of which Connolly was Dungeon Master. Connolly would later program Temple of Apshai, heavily inspired by Dungeons & Dragons, and John Freeman would design the gameplay systems, with another member of their D&D group, Jeff Johnson, providing the level designs. The game sees you exploring the titular Temple of Apshai, an abandoned complex filled with hidden traps, dangerous monsters, and of course, loot aplenty. While there isn't really a story presented to you in the game itself, the manual does provide a bit of context via a short story entitled The Adventures of Brian Hammerhand. I'll summarize it for you. Brian shows up at a shitty pub called the Wallowing Whale Tavern. After punching a dude in the face and impressing the other bar patrons, a mysterious stranger gives him a proposition to get rich, and then tells him of the ruins nearby. Then he takes him to an old man who explains the history of the ruins. Apparently, most of the world worships the earth god Geb. Or is it Jeb? You know what? Jeb sounds funnier. I'm going with Jeb. Some people, however, follow the insect god, Apshai, who honestly sounds cooler, but I guess he might be evil or something? After being ostracized and forced into exile by the Jebites, the Apshaians come across a series of caverns into which they build an underground city, with subterranean gardens, shops, and mines. Everything was great for a while, but then there was an earthquake or something, and the temple collapsed. After a while, the Jebite villagers began to excavate the temple, but it quickly became dangerous and full of monsters. Now adventurers big and small try their hand at exploring the depths of the ruins in search of the treasures hidden within. Most are unsuccessful, many do not survive, and of course, we are one such adventurer. You start the game speaking to the innkeeper. Thus quoth the innkeeper, "Hail and well met. Shall I find a goodly character, or hast thou brought one with thee? Prithee, say yea if I should." Okay, it's kind of hard to tell, but it turns out he's asking me if I want to randomly generate a new character. We are off to a great start so far. Okay, here are my stats. Wow, those are good. I'm sure I'll be fine. No, I need to reroll. How do I reroll? Let me see. Okay, I can't figure out how to reroll my stats. I guess you're just supposed to go with whatever you're given. But screw that, I'm going to reboot the computer. Okay, 10,000 years later, and we can try again. Okay, that's better. These are pretty good stats, except for my intuition. Apparently I'm not a very intuitive person. What does intuition do exactly? Oh, it's used for finding secret doors and traps. Great. Who needs those? Now that I have my character, I need to buy some equipment. The prices are all a bit high, but that's okay because the innkeeper is willing to negotiate. You can make an offer on a piece of equipment, and the innkeeper will either accept or make you a counteroffer. In a way, the innkeeper is the first antagonist you face in Temple of Apshai. The game chooses the amount of money with which you start randomly, and your intelligence and ego stats determine how successful you will be at bargaining. I tended to start off very low and then work my way up gradually. This usually resulted in the innkeeper slowly but steadily lowering his price until we met in the middle. Sometimes this strategy could backfire though, as when I went too low, the prices could actually go up. Of course, if I ever made an offer less than my current offer, it would simply be rejected. When that's all said and done and your character is created and equipped, you are presented with a summary of your stats and inventory. At this point, you are expected to write down all of the values. Why? Because the game didn't originally support saving. If you ever wanted to play with this character again, you needed to keep track of it yourself. When the game asks you if you want to generate a new character, if you say no, you have to type in all of your stats and experience manually. Seriously. This of course means that you can put in whatever you want. The game relies on the honor system to prevent cheating. I guess they expected that players would not want to be deprived the fun of playing legitimately by giving themselves good stats and gear right off the bat, thus robbing them the satisfaction of playing through the game. I of course tried to cheat the very first time I played, and I entered in stats so high the game promptly crashed. Oh well. Once you have your character and equipment, you are ready to enter the dungeon. You have 4 levels to choose from, and the higher the level, the higher the difficulty. So with a randomly generated character, it's a good idea to start at level 1. Okay, here we go. Wait, okay, what's this? What's it doing? Is this the game? Wait, is this... what's it... how... oh, what? Oh, okay, it stopped. Okay, wait, what is this? What am I looking at? Is this the game? Is this what the game looks like? What have I gotten myself into? Look at it! Is that me? Why do I look like that? What is that supposed to be? As it turns out, you begin level 1 right on top of some treasure, just to keep you on your toes. Let's get that out of the way. Each room of the dungeon looks pretty much like this. Some white lines, the occasional rectangle indicating some treasure. That's treasure. And me. The rooms are all numbered so you can look up a description in the manual. Let's look up this one. Room 1. The smooth stonework of the passageway floor shows that advanced methods were used in its creation. A skeleton sprawls on the floor just inside the door, a bony hand still clutching a rusty dagger, outstretched toward the door to safety. A faint roaring sound can be heard from the far end of the passage. Okay, you really have to use your imagination in this game, but considering the computer this was running on, it's somewhat excusable. Below the room number, you can see some other vital information as you explore the dungeon. Wounds represents your health, with 100% being full health, and 0% being dead. I find it a bit strange that 100% wounds means you are perfectly healthy, but whatever. Fatigue is a measurement of how much stamina you have left. As you do things like run or attack, your fatigue percentage goes down. If it's too low, then you have to wait for it to go back up before you can act again. I'll come back to that later. Next we have how much weight you are carrying. This is a combination of your equipment and any treasure you have in your inventory. As you carry more weight, your fatigue percentage goes down faster. Before I go any further, let me talk about the controls in this game, especially the movement controls. They're weird. Now, to be fair, game control standards really hadn't been set at this point, but still. To move, use the number keys, with each number representing the number of feet that you move in one go. If you hit 0, you simply stay put. If you want to change direction, you can use L to turn left, R to turn right, and V to turn around? This really wouldn't be so bad except for 2 things. 1. Every time you take an action, it has to redraw your character, arrow, thing. 2. If you try to move too quickly, you will start losing stamina, so you have to move at a more methodical pace. When you combine these things, you get very, very slow exploration. If there is a point to Temple of Apshai, it would be exploration. There isn't a real goal given to the player, either in the manual or in the game itself, so it seems natural to aspire to explore the dungeon in its entirety, discovering all of its secrets. Each room can have treasure in it. To pick it up, you press the G key. Sometimes you can do this from 20 feet away, sometimes you have to be standing right on top of it. I'm not entirely sure why. When you pick it up, its number appears on the right side of the screen. To find out what it is, you have to, you guessed it, look it up in the manual. Let's see here. Treasure number 20. Nothing of value. As it turns out, you find a lot of treasure number 20 in the dungeon. Well, at least garbage doesn't seem to weigh anything. Treasure can be simple loot such as precious stones or gold, which simply give you more money to buy things from the innkeeper, or it can be magical items such as weapons, magic rings, and potions. The magic rings are supposed to affect your luck when attacking or defending, but it's difficult to tell if they have any effect at all, considering there's no damage indicators or anything. Also, if you quit the game and restart, you won't have the effect anymore. The manual tries to explain this by saying that the magic spells cast on the items lose their effect once removed from the temple, but really it's just a result of not being able to save. Of course, it wouldn't be a Dungeons & Dragons inspired RPG without combat. As you explore the dungeon, you will be periodically assaulted by a monster, such as the extremely vicious mosquito? Combat in Temple of Apshai is actually sort of interesting, and it takes advantage of the limited hardware capability available on those early computers. It's a sort of mixture of real-time and turn-based. Everything happens in discrete turns, and when you take an action, it moves forward one turn instantly. Well, almost instantly. But if you sit there and do nothing, then the turns will move forward on their own. This means that when a monster appears, you can't just sit there daydreaming, you have to act fast. Well, not that fast. The game's still slow as shit. You can, however, choose how slow you want it to be when you start, so that's nice. You have a few different moves available to you in combat, and each has its strengths and weaknesses. The A key is your basic attack with your sword. You need to be close to your enemy, but you don't have to be facing them to hit. It uses a moderate amount of fatigue. T is your thrust. It has a higher chance to hit and does more damage, but it uses a lot of fatigue as well. P is parry, which is also an attack. It does less damage, but it lets you rest for the turn. At long range, you can use your bow. You have to be facing your enemy to hit them, but there is no limit in terms of distance. Magic arrows have a better hit chance than regular arrows, and they do more damage, but you have to find them in the dungeon, so they're pretty valuable. You only ever fight one monster at a time, and if you leave the room, they won't follow you. There are, however, some rooms with multiple enemies that appear one after another. These tend to be the rooms with the best treasures in them. You can also listen for monsters in an adjacent room with the Q key, but this has a random chance of working, and my super low intuition character never seemed to hear anything useful. You are also apparently able to talk to a monster in order to convince it to leave you alone, but I never bothered and I just killed everything I came across. What? As you take damage and your wounds percentage drops, everything you do uses up more fatigue. This can make delving deep into the dungeon very dangerous, as you are forced to move more slowly and attack less often in order to conserve your stamina. It is also possible to heal with healing salves you purchase from the innkeeper or via healing potions acquired within the dungeons themselves, but after purchasing equipment, I never have very much money to buy healing items with a new character, and so the game can be quite treacherous until you're able to get more. You may have noticed by now that there are no sound effects or music. That wasn't an editing choice on my part. The game has no sound whatsoever. The TRS-80 didn't support sound. Instead, you have comic book-like onomatopoeia on the side of the screen, giving you an idea of what's going on. This is actually pretty cool, except for the fact that it can be difficult to tell what some of the words are supposed to mean. I mentioned that any action taken by the character would force a turn change immediately. This is true, but each turn takes time due to the glacial pace at which the screen updates. This means that I often hit the attack key, only to find out a few seconds later that I killed the monster already, and they exploded. And then I attack nothing. This wouldn't be such a big deal, except it uses up my fatigue and makes me wait while it animates, which is very frustrating. To get the best treasures, you need to find secret doors throughout the dungeon. Pressing E while facing a wall searches for a secret door. If there is a secret door, you have a random chance of it appearing based on your intuition stat. Since Roland here has an intuition of 6 and wouldn't notice a bear if it were currently mauling his face, I often have to search multiple times. You also have to search for traps, which are often guarding the more valuable treasures in the dungeon. Again, your search may fail depending on the dice roll, but you can search as many times as you want. To trigger a trap, you have to walk near it, but if you're moving fast enough, you can leap over the trap and avoid it altogether. The dungeon levels are identical from play session to play session, so it is possible, and probably wise, to map out the dungeon by hand while traversing it so you know what to look for on future playthroughs. While exploring the dungeon, you will occasionally come across a room that presents more of a challenge than others. These contain the best treasures in the game, and they are usually pretty deep in the level. Since you can only fight a single enemy at a time, these rooms tend to throw multiple enemies at you in sequence, and each one is pretty tough. While Temple of Apshai isn't the most exhilarating of games, these boss rooms were definitely the emotional high points of my playthrough, and I often died trying to best them. Death in Temple of Apshai is sometimes a frustrating experience. You are at the mercy of the random number generator, as pretty much everything you do is determined by virtual dice rolls. Sometimes it is wise to run away, as the monsters won't follow you into another room, but even that can be treacherous. If you've run out of healing items, your only option is to make the slow march back to the entrance of the dungeon. Once you get to low health, movement is excruciating. You're forced to only walk a few feet per turn, and you still have to wait for the screen to redraw. If you are unfortunate enough to come across a random monster as you inch your way to the door, you have to be extremely careful not to use up all of your stamina, as defending yourself will reduce your fatigue percentage faster when you are hurt. All of this does create some tension as you attempt to escape, but I found it far more frustrating and tedious than tense and exciting. If you do end up dying, there are a few things that can happen. You might be eaten by a monster, which means your character is permanently dead and all of your equipment is lost. At this point, your character is theoretically unplayable, but again, there's nothing at all stopping you from just typing their information back in like nothing ever happened. But that would be cheating, and we would never do that, right? If you aren't eaten, you might be found by a wandering adventurer. If the cleric finds you, then all is well, and you get to continue on with all of your stuff and your experience. If the wizard finds you, then he still carries you out of the dungeon, but he takes any magical items you might be carrying. Seems like a pretty fair trade to me. If you are found by the dwarf, your rescue comes at a heavy price. He saves your life, sure, but he also takes all of your money and magical items. Since it doesn't have a goal, you pretty much just play Temple of Apshai until you grow tired of it. To play the proper way, that is, without cheating, you create a character, explore the dungeon, gather treasure and experience, and when you're hurt or carrying too much loot, you try to make it out alive. While you're doing this, you pretty much have to methodically map everything out so you know where to go on subsequent playthroughs. As you find treasure and buy better equipment, you can kill more monsters. As you do so, you get more experience, and then you can move on to the higher levels of the dungeon. If you die, which you will, a lot, you start over. Even though each level only has between 50 to 60 rooms, the extremely slow speed of gameplay and the constant deaths and retreats to safety make this a relatively long and drawn-out process. Theoretically, once you've mapped out much of the dungeon and can gather treasure more quickly, you can progress faster, but you're still at the mercy of the dice rolls, and a string of bad luck can force you to start a new character all over again. The slowness, the writing stats down, and the fairly harsh penalties for death make Temple of Apshai a trying experience, but these frustrations are compounded by the numerous bugs present in the game. Many times when I successfully made it out of the dungeon, the game forgot how much experience I had earned, and since the experience granted for each monster kill is never explicitly told to the player, there isn't really a way to figure it out on your own. On another playthrough, I had gotten some good loot and was hurt badly, but I made it all the way to the room right before the entrance, and for some reason I couldn't go through the opening to get out. I tried leaving and coming back, I tried pressing the open door button, I tried running through at full speed, nothing worked. I mentioned before that I tried entering really high stats for my character the first time I played and the game crashed. After that I tried entering really low stats. The results were interesting. I had so little strength and constitution that as soon as the game started, my fatigue percentage went way into the negative and I was unable to move or take any actions. It's like my character was a quadriplegic who was dumped out of his wheelchair into the dungeon and left there to contemplate the texture of the stones in the floor. Overall, my impression of this game is not particularly good. By modern standards, it is extremely primitive and offers little in the way of enjoyment that can't be found done better in countless other games. The lack of an end goal, or any enforcement of the rules to prevent cheating, take away any meaning the game might have had. Who cares if I die and get eaten? I'll just pretend like it didn't happen. The manual presents this as a more convenient alternative to playing a pen and paper role-playing game with your friends, but it seems a poor imitation to me. Having said that, the creators of Temple of Apshai were pioneers. While they may not have been the first to attempt a computerized RPG, they were among the first to realize the market potential. They took a game as complicated as Dungeons & Dragons and put it on home computers which, compared to today's technology, were extremely limited. They created a game for a market that didn't even exist at the time. This is evident in the manual's introduction, which tries to explain the game to a reader, without assuming they have ever played an RPG before, or even that they are particularly familiar with computers. This makes sense. In 1979, home computers were not at all common, and for anyone who hadn't played a pen and paper RPG, this would have almost certainly been their first experience with the genre. It is thus understandable why Temple of Apshai became fairly popular, spawning several expansions and sequels in the Dunjonquest series. Temple of Apshai would make its way onto other computer platforms. including the Apple II, Commodore 64, and IBM PC. These versions contained improvements from the TRS-80 original, including improved graphics, faster draw times, and sound effects. Later, it was remade along with its 2 expansions and released as the Temple of Apshai trilogy. Playing Temple of Apshai as a modern gamer is something of an intriguing experience. Without knowing its history, the primitive visuals and unfamiliar control scheme would likely drive away most. But with that context, it provides a fascinating glimpse into the origins of RPGs. That said, I really can't recommend playing the original TRS-80 version unless you are very interested in seeing where the genre began. Going through the trouble of finding a TRS-80 in the original discs, or even an emulator with disc images, is simply not worth the effort if you're looking to have fun. There are far too many RPGs out there with better gameplay, better graphics, actual sound, and more convenient options for playing them. Temple of Apshai was, however, the genesis of a new genre, a pioneer that managed to craft a recognizable role-playing experience from such limited hardware, and for that, I have to give it credit. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time on The Quest Log.